Good evening, Mayor and Council. It is now 7 p.m. and we are live online.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Good evening. This is the City Council workshop, and I will be sitting in for the mayor, who is online, and we'll do roll call. I see Molly and Jeff and myself and Paloma and George and our city attorney, Jennifer Gray, and our city administrator, Chris White, and Mayor, you're online?
I am.
And also Natalie is online also. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody this coming Monday, February 17th, so in 1 week from today, is the rescheduled Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. birthday celebration at the historic Springfield Baptist Church at 8 Mattie Cooper Square. The celebration theme for 2025 is Keeping the Dream Alive. 8:30 a.m. on Monday, the 17th, is Continental Breakfast. 9:30 a.m. is the 11th annual MLK Jr. Parade. At 10:30 a.m., the annual celebration service with the preacher of Reverend Barbara Williams, and then lunch will be served directly after the service for those who would like to stay and eat in the dining room, or they can have takeout meals. So hopefully you all can attend. Thank you.
And Pam will have those details on our community calendar shortly, so that people can just go there in case they didn't write all that down.
Thank you. Okay, so first on our agenda is the proposed local law concerning use regulations for drive-through facilities and self-service storage businesses. And Natalie and Jennifer will be introducing this.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in real quick. So what you have in front of you, this was discussed at the last workshop meeting. And what you'll see in terms of the local law is there was a provision added in section 223-17. Just to make it clear going forward, this is very standard language that you see in a lot of municipalities, that if a use is not expressly permitted, right, if it's not expressly permitted within the zoning district or within the table, that you presume it is, you presume that it is prohibited, right? And I think that there was some lack of clarity in there because drive-throughs weren't a listed use. So that's kind of why we added that section in. You'll also see that in sections for the CMS district and the linkage district, where there had been kind of standalone language regarding drive-through facilities, that has been stricken now since everything is kind of covered within the use table. And then the amendment to attachment 2, the use table, 2 changes there. Self-storage facility has kind of been pulled out as its own use. We continue to prohibit that in all the districts that it was formerly prohibited in, when it was kind of lumped with wholesale and warehouse storage, and then also prohibited that use within the districts that line the Fishkill Avenue, the project area of the Fishkill Avenue Committee. Additionally, under permitted accessory uses, drive-through facilities, whether standalone or accessory, is now listed, expressly listed. And again, that is, right now, that is prohibited in all districts. We kept it prohibited in the CMS and the linkage district as it was with that standalone language. Obviously made it prohibited in the residential districts. And then by the time you kind of add in the districts that are in the Fishkill Avenue corridor, the only ones left were the waterfront districts. So it kind of ends up being prohibited in all districts. So that was, that's what we drafted based on the conversation with the council at the last meeting. I don't know if Jen has anything to add, but I think that's, we wanted to get something in front of the council for discussion and potential modification.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is procedurally, we're at a work session tonight, obviously, in preparation of your regular meeting next week. So provided that this language is suitable to you, this would be the local law that you could introduce at your meeting next week. And then the next step would be to refer that to the county planning and your city planning board for for comment.
Okay, anybody have anything to say? I did that so pretty.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Paloma.
I had a few questions. It was good relooking at this table, both this week and last week. And I wanted to make sure I'm understanding, for one, why we put the drive-through facilities under permitted accessory uses as opposed to parking and auto-oriented or food-oriented. And sort of related, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the permitted accessory uses category broadly, because it does list, for example, parking structure, which I understood and read to mean like a garage next to a personal residence, in which case, as opposed to under parking auto-oriented off-street parking or parking structure above. And I'm wondering if we should be clarifying that, for example, to say private parking structure or parking structures garage.
Yeah, I can respond to those. So drive-through facilities is listed as accessory use because the drive-through component could be accessory to a number of different uses, right? You have bank facilities sometimes that have drive-throughs. Back in the day, we had those dairy farm stores that had drive-throughs. You have fast food establishments with drive-throughs. So the drive-through facility is an accessory component to other permitted uses. So that's why that was listed there. And then why you see parking structure, it's actually listed both under parking auto-oriented. Right up there you'll see off-street parking or parking structure, and it is listed again as parking structure accessory use. So what that's distinguishing between is either a standalone parking structure or off-street parking facility that is the primary use of the lot, right? What you would see in terms of like some of the municipal lots, versus what you're seeing down lower under the permitted accessory uses. When parking structure is listed there, it's as reference as an accessory component to a larger development, right? So if you would see, what you would see is a mixed-use development, maybe with parking either adjacent to it or beneath it, right, down underground. So that's talking about parking structures as an accessory component to a development versus as a primary use, and that's why they're distinguished in those two different sections.
So you're saying that parking structure under permitted accessory uses would be an accessory parking structure, not only for residential, but it could be for commercial use, like in the general, you're like trying to read this table correctly.
Yeah, it could be accessory to parking structure, could be accessory to anything, to any use, right? It could be a hospital, it could be accessory to, medical facility, different commercial uses, residential buildings. So it's just what that's talking about there in that section is whether or not you're allowed to have structured parking within a development as an accessory component.
Okay.
Any other questions?
My other big bucket of questions was around the this change in expressly prohibiting non-listed uses. And I'd like to tease that out a bit more because I'm a little concerned that we're prohibiting some uses unintentionally. But if other folks had questions about other topics,
No, I had a question exactly about that. It's almost impossible to anticipate every possible use. So if it's not described, then it would not be permitted. If someone came up with something else, say like a film studio or something like that, and it's not listed as a permitted use, what would the process be about getting, would it be a variance that they would be required to have?
So that process would be one of two things. One, it could be a use variance. Mm-hmm. The more likely scenario is that particular property owner or tenant would come to your board and seek a zoning amendment, petition the board to have a film studio added as a permitted use in one or more of the districts. Okay. So the language that was added to the code to say that any use not specifically permitted in the code is deemed prohibited, that's a general principle of zoning, that if you don't list it as a permitted use, either principally permitted or especially permitted, it's deemed to be prohibited, because otherwise you're you could potentially allow any use, right, under the sun, under certain interpretations. So it's a general zoning principle that wasn't explicitly set forth in your code. So we thought it was a good idea to put that in there to make it clear that to any user, any person reading the code, that if you don't see your use listed here in the table, it's not allowed.
So in theory, if this zoning language was in effect right now, someone who wanted to do a drive-through, they would come to us and ask for drive-through to be included, possibly?
Yeah, I mean, right, so if this particular local law goes forward and is adopted and drive-through facilities are prohibited in every district, if someone were to propose a drive-through facility, they would either have to seek a use variance to allow that drive-through facility, or they'd have to come back to the city council to seek a further zoning amendment.
And from what I understand about use variance, you have to prove that all the other uses are not economically feasible?
Right, you can't get a reasonable return.
It's a higher burden or obstacle to get over.
It is, yeah, use variances are difficult
Okay.
to secure.
Molly, you had.
Yeah, I was going to say, and maybe this is different than where my other fellow city council members are leaning, that I appreciate the elegance of this, of being clear about what we expressly allow and what we prohibit, even within the boundaries of, there might be some other, given our move to this, we might decide there are some other uses that we want to include in here, particularly if we say, oh, something like a film studio might be something we might allow in some of our districts. So that might be extra work that then the city council might want to consider. So I appreciate that, both because it's in line, as Natalie said, with what other municipalities do, and that it kind of solves the immediate issue in an elegant way, given our code. I did have some questions about self-storage and prohibiting it throughout the city. I don't have any totally strong feelings one way or the other, but I was like, oh, and I started to think about it, and I actually started to focus particularly on the light industrial districts and looking. I appreciate why it was included is because there is some light industrial close to or within the boundaries of the particular Fishkill Avenue corridor, and I looked at light industrial areas in other parts of the city, and so that was an area where I had questions about whether or not. I appreciate there seems to be a number of them both within the city now and sort of fairly close outside the boundaries of the city. So this might not be an immediate thing that needs to be solved for, but it was an area where I certainly felt more open to ideas about it, particularly given where our light industrial areas are and the idea that maybe that might be the kind of business that's more acceptable to the uses that surround light industrial, whereas I feel differently about drive-throughs and the places that drive-throughs tend to be want to locate it. They want that through traffic and the pedestrian-friendly, heavier use that we're looking to encourage that might be counter to that. So that's kind of where I'm leaning right now. I did have a particular question that I think I know the answer to, but want to confirm. If we did adopt something either directly like this or similar to it, is my assumption correct that those pre-existing businesses that would no longer fall into these permitted uses, would they automatically be grandfathered in until they came before the planning board, or would that depend on the district and the zone that they're in?
So any use that's currently legal at this time, if it were to be deemed prohibited under the, so say you had a self-storage facility somewhere, right, in any district, and as you adopt this local law, that self-storage facility would no longer be a permitted use in that district. It then becomes a pre-existing legal non-conforming use and can continue. It can't be enlarged or expanded upon, but it can continue.
Okay, great, thank you.
So, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm sorry that I'm remote. I just think I've told the council I just had a funeral, so I apologize for not being there in person. Yeah, where the issue that Molly raised, so I just want to talk about that for a minute. One, that particular issue I don't think has any time sensitivity to it. So, that's the first thing. And because of that, I would advise council to be cautious in this area. And then second, the reason that they were being isolated as an item of concern or a use of concern is that it doesn't generate a lot of foot traffic, and we're interested in something, zoning Route 52 or certainly our Main Street where we have foot traffic. I don't see any particular reason not to include it elsewhere in the city. In particular, if we're trying to move to a world where apartments are smaller, people don't have cars, that means they may be storing stuff. And, you know, it would be nice if people could get through their storage stuff without using a car, which would suggest we need one in the city. So again, for instance, the one that exists off 52, maybe that's a perfectly fine place to zone it, but on 52, I would understand that reasoning. So I think we should be cautious here.
Yeah, I was looking at that too, Lee, and I think where that current one happens to reside is in a light industrial area, if I'm reading the map correctly.
And Lee, are you suggesting that be cautious, but come back to it and discuss it at a later date?
Well, we have time, so one option is to move forward on some, but not others. If we want to sort it now, we just may want to be careful about maybe just limiting it, that use in areas where we're expecting foot traffic, you know, heavy foot traffic. So that would be Main Street and 52 and maybe at the train station or something. And if we don't have a zone that does that, we might want to think about a way to do it that fits correctly. And that's why, you know, because we have time, there's no deadline, we could think about it either way. Jennifer may have a view on how to go about doing this, and I'd certainly defer if she's got some ideas.
Nothing beyond what you've laid out, Mayor. I think you're right that it's self-storage facilities are traditionally, you know, very, very, very low traffic facilities, let alone foot traffic, just vehicular traffic in addition to that. So if you are looking to create a more vibrant, street activated area, self-storage facilities isn't first in line for a compatible use for that particular vision. So the mayor's right, somewhere like Main Street wouldn't make a lot of sense. But as far as, you know, timing goes, I mean, look, we have the local law drafted with self-storage facilities being prohibited throughout the city pursuant to the discussion from the last meeting. If you wanted to amend that in some way prior to introducing the local law at your next meeting, we're happy to do that.
Well, the other option is to include it and then revisit it at a later point.
Correct.
Right.
So by doing that, you will, for a period of time, to the extent there are any self-storage facilities currently operating in Beacon, those would, for that period of time, be deemed non-conforming uses and wouldn't be permitted to be enlarged or expanded during that period of time until you revisit, potentially allowing
And if we
that.
did revisit and they wanted to expand, if we changed it and they fell within the areas we now allowed it, they would then be allowed to do that.
They would, yes, yeah.
One other thought that I had was including it, but it sounds like our next step at our voting meeting is before we set the public hearing, we send it to the planning board and the county planning board. Is there a way to draft a memo that we explicitly ask for their input on those issues? So we say, this is our current proposal, this is what we're considering. Do you have any feedback on this particular element of, are there any areas we should consider including self-storage units rather than prohibiting them throughout the city?
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I'm inclined to take that approach right now. I appreciate we're changing to not allowing them rather than currently they're allowed, and so we're sort of forcing the issue, but I feel like I'm okay with moving forward in that way and kind of hearing feedback from our planning board and our county planning board, and then obviously the public when we get to that stage. I'm curious if others, including Lee, have thoughts about that.
And again, the only thing I'd add is ask yourself, okay, suppose that we were permitted use citywide. You think the viability of self-storage on Main Street would ever exist? I mean, real estate's so expensive, the odds are zero, right? And I think similarly on 52, the odds are extremely low. So, you know, while I appreciate we're thinking about this, I think the practical effect is where we permit them as opposed to where we don't. And I think simply saying, you could have them citywide, you could be almost assured, like, I'll make you a high bet, it ain't ever coming on Main Street is probably not coming on 52, right? Because it's too expensive real estate. Now, maybe on 52, there is more risk than Main Street. And I think that's where we should be considering. So it's my only 2 cents. Because I just said I think the odds are extremely low, because it needs large space that's cheap.
So you're suggesting allow it throughout the city, but it's not going to happen, as opposed to not allow it throughout the city, and then they can come before us and
yeah, so for instance, if we thought we should end up with a unique Fishkill Avenue district, then we could say, okay, I got a CMS, we could exclude it, even though it doesn't matter. And then just in case, we could say, well, let's exclude it in the Fishkill district, simply because in the short run, real estate prices, might permit it by chance. So that's what I'm saying. Right now, our only option is to do either LI or GB or something like that, where I think we want to be a little bit more targeted as to where it's not allowed. Right. Does anyone have any concern other than Route 52 and Main Street for these? Let me ask it the other way.
I would too if we did build a connector road and before something else was built, if the first proposal along that connector road was self-storage.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have one of those yet, but
No.
we could certainly,
No.
right? But we could create a district for that, or that's what I'm thinking. I think we have a lot of flexibility on how to proceed on this, and I just worry about zoning out rather than including something later on we don't want.
I'm comfortable with Molly's proposal to put this set of questions to the planning boards that will be reviewing the local law and to public comment. I'm open to perspectives on either side of this one.
And I agree with Paloma and Molly as well.
Yeah, I can agree with it, would agree to that.
Yeah, I will say my impression of Beacon is that I feel like what I like about the timing of this, which was not intended this way, is that I feel with an eye to the comprehensive plan that we are getting to the place as a community where we are able to wrap our hands around what are the uses we actually want. So to bring up the example that George might have picked out of thin air, but film studio might be something we are okay with in certain areas. And so talking about that more explicitly, and I appreciate that as a shift that for a time we needed for really strong and true economic reasons to be more flexible about that. And I feel like we might be okay with moving away from that, and maybe this is potentially the first example of us doing that, knowing that we might continue to iterate on this, not least in our comprehensive planning process.
Yeah, I think the light industrial zone in particular is where we have some of these potential middling uses that I'm interested in teasing out as well.
Lee, do you have any other comments?
I said, I think, at least in my head, where I'm heading is that I view our LI, GB, HI zoning as not fit for purpose on Route 52, and I can imagine us wanting something a little bit specific to that. I think we need to be careful because we have industrial uses on 52. They generate jobs. We want that to continue. But my own 2 cents would be, I think this discussion is better had when we can isolate that section, because I believe that the only 2 areas we don't want self-storage in is Main Street, which economically doesn't matter, it's not viable. Route 52 might be viable for a while, so we might want to zone that specifically. Otherwise, I kind of see permitting, which is why I'm thinking, maybe we need to be reworking a specific zone here and some sort of general, either GB, LI combination elsewhere.
Jennifer, do you feel like we were specific enough to translate our questions, or should we try and summarize?
I mean, so what I took from it was that you want to move forward with the local law as drafted and pose the question to the planning board regarding self-storage facilities. Basically, where should they be permitted? Where should they be allowed within the city? If there were additional questions, let me know, but that's what I took from the conversation.
No, I think you said it correctly, Jennifer. I'm sort of, in a way, offering an option for the planning board. There's no reason to give it to them. They'll sort it on their own. I'm good.
I will say, to circle back around our shift in explicitly not permitting unlisted uses, the one use that I'm concerned about, though it's not timely, is a grocery store. And I'm not clear in reading the table if that would be permitted under one of the existing categories or if that would need to be an added use.
So that's retail, I would think, Jennifer.
Is it?
I think so. I'm just looking at the list here. And Natalie, chime in if you've got the category handy, but I mean, it certainly is retail.
Yeah.
I'm just looking to see if there's something more
I hear
specific.
Paloma's point that it's not, a grocery store isn't called out. And that, I guess, that's kind of highlighting some of the gray areas of zoning, is I think grocery stores are traditionally treated as retail. I was just going to look up the definition for retail real quick. And that's kind of what your zoning administrator would do, right? If somebody came to them wanting to place a grocery store somewhere, they would look to see if it fits within the definition of any of the expressly permitted uses. Retail.
Yeah, and if you think the law as written covers that, then I'm good. But
Yes.
that's just the one that stuck out to me.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think by adding this clause to our zoning table, it behooves us to spend a little time going where Paloma and some others are going, which is, are the items on our list now general enough to encompass all retail uses, for instance, right? Because what we're saying is that's good. I think where it gets harder in that example of a film studio, that's not selling anything. So it's not retail, it's not office. So there might be a category where we want to define something other than retail and office, where it is a Main Street type use, and we want to permit it. I don't know the answer to that, but I would ask our
That
planner
might
attorney to
fall
think
under
about
some sort of arts use or art studio, I'm not sure.
Maybe that-
Kind of a question I had is like, how much room for interpretation is there either with the building department or the planning board as to how to interpret these sometimes vague, things like retail?
So for example, retail has a very specific definition, right? The sale of goods directly to the general public for personal, household, or business consumption, including but not limited to appliance store, bakery, delicatessen, drugstore, florist, supermarket, hardware store, liquor store, newsstand, shoes, right? So it goes through a number of listed uses. So I mean, to the mayor's point, I think that it could be as we continue to kind of look at the code, that could be a useful exercise, is to take some of the more general terms and look up how your code defines them. And I think we might be able to see where there's some gaps, where some newer uses aren't adequately defined within the code. For example, like some things we see a lot now that I see a lot of communities, things like you have daycare facilities, and a lot of municipalities, their code will talk about daycare facilities specifically for children, whereas now we're seeing daycare facilities for adults as a use that comes up. So that's one that I see a lot of communities I work in trying to kind of modify those definitions. So I think the point's taken. I think it's a good exercise for us to do, and I can definitely take the lead on that.
Great.
I had a very specific just question with the amendments. I saw for the part of what we were proposing for the Central Main Street district that there was parts that were stricken, but the word reserved in all caps was added in a couple places, and I just didn't understand. I assume that's some coding art. I just want you to explain that. That would be great.
Sure, it's just that, you have that particular section that has that text in it now, and if we were to just eliminate that particular section designation altogether, then the whole code would need to be readjusted to account for the elimination of that particular section. So instead, what we typically do is we reserve that code designation.
I see. So rather than
That
having to have a
people-
new D and all the
Exactly,
rest of the letters, you do that
yeah.
instead. Thank you
Yeah.
for explaining that.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Hey Natalie, when you take a look, I'm just seeing artist studio, art gallery, exhibit space under office. It may make more sense if there were a separate category, kind of where George was going, so that would allow film studio or other things, and maybe it's separate from office in an individual category. But do think about it, and you're going to give us advice, so thank you.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good suggestion. I think that goes to Molly's point about being more expressly, like, encouraging the uses that the community knows they want, right? And I think calling something out like that, like arts uses like that, I think definitely is one way to send that message through your code.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments? So we're going to move forward as it's written with questions to the planning board on the self-storage. Okay. Thank you, Natalie. So I think you're...
I get to go. I get to be free. Awesome. Thank you all so much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks you, Natalie.
All right, now on to extension of special use permit for 416 through 420 Main Street. Jennifer will introduce that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So you have an application before you to extend the special use permit approval for 416 to 420 Main Street. This was a special use permit that was previously granted in 2021. And part of the limitations is that all the construction needs to be completed 2 years after the building permit is issued. Building permit was issued in June of 2022, which would have put the deadline for all construction to be completed by June of 2024. Last year, you did approve a 6-month extension to December of 2024. The applicant timely submitted another extension request seeking to have this further extended into June of 2025. We did reach out to the building department to find out the status of construction and to find out whether, in the building inspector's opinion, the applicant has been proceeding with due diligence towards the completion of construction, and the building department confirmed that, in fact, they have. Most of the delays have been apparently attributable to like materials delays, things outside of their control. But the building inspector did confirm that he believes everything will be complete by this summer. So if not, hopefully sooner. So our office has no concerns or no objections to the city council moving forward with granting the additional 6-month extension.
Comments?
So go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, can you, I see also in the letter, I guess, from your office that the building inspector has granted a temporary certificate of occupancy. Yes, at the end of last month on January 29th. Can you say a little bit about what that means in practice for the building part of this project?
Yeah, so TCOs are typically granted when, like, life safety issues have been addressed, and maybe there are some finishing items, punch list items that need to be completed. For example, a good example is like landscaping. If a building is ready to be occupied in the middle of winter, but the landscaping isn't complete yet because the developer can't install the landscaping in the middle of the winter, a TCO may be issued in that instance to allow for occupancy of the building, and then once the warmer months roll around and the landscaping can be completed, the final certificate of occupancy can be issued. So that's one example of when TCOs are used.
So that means that people could start occupying or using the internal part of the building even though the external landscaping is not finished?
Theoretically, yes. I don't know what the specific, sometimes
So
there are specific
they
conditions.
may or may not do this. But.
Yeah, sometimes there are specific conditions on the TCO, but theoretically, yes. Occupancy can start.
I can keep going, but if others have questions, I'm fine to do.
I'll come back to you. Any other comments or questions?
So I wasn't on council when this was originally approved, but I did look back at, and I kind of followed along vaguely, and I do remember that the discussion of the central public green space was a big part of why the council actually approved the special use permit. And which allowed the fourth floors particularly, and it says that in the initial approval back in 2021. And I saw from the letter that it looks like that's the area that now that we're in winter with the snow that is not ready to be open to the public yet. So my question for you is, I'm fine with this extension. If we get to if we get into the spring, summer, and they have yet to complete that part, and they come back to us for another extension, what is the power of the council to start to say, hey, this was a condition of your approval, and now we're in the first summer where maybe other things are open, the restaurant's open, the businesses upstairs are open, but that public park is not open. What recourse do we have to make sure that that actually happens in as timely manner as possible?
So I think the best recourse is the fact that they're not going to get their final certificate of occupancy until that is completed.
Is a temporary one time-bound?
I believe that it is. Each municipality has different rules with respect to their TCO, so I'd have to double-check your code to see if and under what circumstances that time period exists. But I think that's the biggest backstop, as I usually call it, is the fact that they're not going to get their final CO. Your extensions are really limited to changes of circumstances or changes of law. If there hasn't been a change of circumstance, there hasn't been a change in the project, there hasn't been a change in the law, the case law says that extensions should be granted.
Great, thank you. It's not, I assume they're moving forward in good faith. This is more me just seeing that and having and having heard the conversation that kind of teasing that out took some time. So
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure before we even get close to that possibility that I kind of understood there. That was it for me.
It sounds like it might be helpful if that temporary certificate of occupancy could be shared with the council so we could understand those details, if that's possible.
And a temporary certificate of occupancy shall be effective for a period of time not to exceed 6 months
Thank you, Chris.
under our code.
Thank you, Chris.
You're not allowed to speak.
We do have, it expires in April, and we did include a copy of the submission.
Thanks.
We submitted it to council.
Lee, do you have anything you wanted to add?
On this issue? No?
I mean, just for the record, I noted that the recording of the July 1st extension doesn't show the vote count in there on the table at the end. It just seems like it's just the before the law, so that should just be updated for the record.
Are you referring to when the council voted on it July of last year?
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll ready to have this ready for the council meeting next week?
Yes.
Okay. And now, on to our last item on the agenda, 2025 City of Beacon priorities. And Lee, you are going to lead us on that discussion.
Yeah, that's why I'm on the call this evening. Let me, I hope you've all had a chance to look. It hasn't changed since then, although we would probably make some corrections and additions. What I would suggest is that we kind of go down each section, see if there's any questions, and then we keep going, because I think that the reason I put this together was, you know, the council's role in terms of policy and budget is relevant here. Most of the things in the top are not the council's job, right? The administration, meaning the execution of these projects, is, under the city administrator and the mayor. But it's here because it's helpful to see, here's the list of things that has to get done and that are getting done this year. Most of these items are this year. A couple of them will extend into next year. Occasionally we'll shift something back for some reason or another. So we just want you to see this and then get to the back, which is, okay, what new things might we want? That's getting close to policy, where I'd ask that we spend some time focusing. So we did a list at the back end, but there's probably some more things. And it'll give the council a sense of, okay, you can put something in the queue, but you got to clear stuff out first. You might have to find funding. Might take a little while, but that might be a better way than, a council member just raising, hey, somebody said this, can we get this done now? And it's like, generally, that's not how it works. It takes longer to queue something up, find funding. So that's what this is about. Does that generally make sense before we go through it?
Just to, if the public's looking at this, could you define like HML?
Oh, sure. So, this isn't meant to be, a definitive Gantt chart or anything like that. This is nothing like that. In fact, we would not use one. This is done to give just a sense of how much time it would take. So the projects are organized first into capital projects, then operating projects, and then divided into which department is doing the bulk of the work, and then what additional time might happen with other groups. So the column that says under time, department, right, in the first section, it's the highway department that's doing a lot of this work. There's a couple of other departments in that first list, but it's mostly highway. So that column is giving you a sense of, is it a lot of their time? Is it a little of their time? So it's just high, medium, low, not more than that. Same with administration. Administration refers to largely, Chris, myself, Ben, but also legal support if there is some that's not, primary job, engineering support, finance support. And so again, kind of a high, medium, low. And it's not more than that, right? The other columns are just telling you, how much dough are we talking about, and is it city tax money, or do we have it from another source? And anytime we can get it from another source, that's really worth doing, especially for large projects, and especially if we can get the funding, it's worth waiting for. So. Is that helpful enough? All right, so let me just run you through that first list. The first one are capital projects. You can see at the top of the list is finishing Fishkill Teller, right? And as you know, that's somebody else's money. And it's, a huge win for us to have been able to basically save the loss of that funding by getting this job queued up and done. There's always milling and paving. Some of that is covered by our annual CHIPS money. Some of it is covered elsewhere. There's some other items, including some park work. The biggest item on the table that is ours is the Highway Department vehicle equipment, which we can't get. I think we have to use our own money. And then the other one is doing Park Avenue. I don't think we've got funding for that, do we, Chris? Somewhere else? That's the rehab in the bathrooms.
South Ave.
We have a member item from Jacobson's office.
Okay, so it's a small plus, right?
It's either 125 or 150, I'm forgetting.
I got to thank Jonathan again. So, it's always an excellent source of funds. San Limon does a great job of helping us with things. So we'll get that included in there, and that makes it a lot easier. There's a few items on this that I might have gotten wrong. Chris, you said I wrote, no, I think this section is okay. I think I did all right on this section.
Maybe the visitor center bathroom, it sounded like there wasn't more steps to that.
Yeah, is that on the first section, or is it after this?
It's number 11, Lee, on the first
Thank you.
section.
Yeah, so I had thought we were going to try to face the bathrooms outward, and I think I'm incorrect on that. Chris, you're going to help me?
To be determined, Lee.
Okay, so Yeah, so this isn't going to get done unless we can do something like that. We've rehabilitated the bathrooms when they repainted, is that correct? In the visitor center?
The visitor center exterior has been repainted. We are cleaning the bathrooms now regularly. Once we reactivated the center, we did add an element of a contractor coming in to make sure those bathrooms were clean. But they're only open when the center is open.
Okay. Yeah, so this is incorrect, right? I had assumed we had a project teed up here and we don't. So that one should just come off the table. Anything else on that first bucket? When you get to items 20 and 21, those are not the highway department. But you know, because this list includes everything in our capital plan for the current year and for prior years that aren't complete, that's why there's an item 20 for vehicle purchase by police. Again, largely somebody else's money. And then the other big item here is for a ladder truck. Not sure Chris, you think, are we going to try to get that this year?
We're either going to order it, or we may have an opportunity to buy a truck that was fabricated for another municipality that then didn't want it. So we're seeing if that's possible, because we could save hundreds of thousands of dollars on the truck. So again, to be determined, we're playing it out.
Okay, so that's a good example of, you know, is it, or do we have to do it right now? We're going to at some point. We put it in our capital plan, but there's some play and some judgment call that can save taxpayers, you know, $250,000 or $500,000.
But if that doesn't work out, we will be ordering it this year, because it's a 4 to 5 year lead time on these trucks.
Okay. Council good with that set?
I just want to double check that the skate park rehab includes the public art space that we had discussed as well?
It will.
Great.
Yeah, we met with the high school students, was it last week or the week before? And Mark Price is all over it.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Okay, so that's the first set. The second set is, these are also capital projects, but they're water and sewer, right? Or wastewater treatment plant. So I just, you know, largely the effort there, the department involved is either going to be water or the wastewater treatment plant. So either, you know, the people the department heads there have a significant amount of work on the projects because they have to oversee it. And then to a lesser degree, there's, you know, effort by, you know, Chris and myself with some oversight. So that's what's meant here.
And the meter upgrade has been quite a bit of work for our finance department as well, because they've had to figure out how the new meters are talking to the old system. So that's been a significant investment of time by our finance department and Susan Tucker.
Yeah, absolutely. And finance is one of the areas that has been consistently overworked, and we're just cautious there because it's also our, you know, people we really want to keep. So, yeah, the one item here that has some uncertainty, it didn't in our first draft, but the Melzinga Dam rehab. You know, Chris, do you want to talk about what you're thinking or what we're thinking there?
Yeah, we're going to hold Melzinga Dam rehabilitation until next year. We applied for a $2 million grant this year. We didn't get it. A number of municipalities around us did get it. We've done a debrief with the agency. We'll be seeking that funding next year and trying again. We have an authorization to do the work, and that doesn't sunset until 2029. So we have some time. There's no imminent danger, but we do need to do the work in the next years.
Right, so there'll be some prep work on, you know, the administration's part of getting that in and trying to get it across the finish line. Obviously, if we can move 3.9 million, you know, to move a couple million over into somebody else's money, we're trying to do that. There are a couple of big items here that, you know, we are self-funding. We're going to be bonding for, and this is paid for from water and sewer fees, not from, you know, property tax revenue. I will note, and I pulled up a study there was a shared service study, I think it was 2015, the village and town of Fishkill and city of Beacon looked at wastewater treatment, doing that together. And that study, while it didn't move forward, did point out that our plant, the wastewater treatment plant, was pretty much at its age. And that started us down the process of doing not a new plant, but starting to replace the core components. And that's what you're seeing on this list.
And the roof replacement number 30 is nearly done. That should be wrapped up this week.
Cool. And I'm hoping you're going to tell me that the cost is a fraction of what we wrote down.
That's true.
Cool.
What fraction it is, I don't quite remember, but it's
one of the
probably
things,
about a quarter of what we had initially.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that Chris is focused on is building the highway department team of folks who do building support. And, you know, when you can wheel them in to get construction done, like a roof or a locker room or whatever, it's turned out to be a really effective way of saving taxpayer money. So thank you for that. Okay.
Just to, before you move on to this section, I assume these are all capital projects in this section. So these are all ones that we already discussed and approved for capital funding. We haven't necessarily had to go out to bonds yet, but these are ones we've discussed. So.
Yeah, and some of the capital projects are years in the making. I just look back quickly, and like the We Play project that we did last year had been approved in 2020. The South Avenue, the first work on the retaining wall was originally approved in 2017. Fishkill Avenue goes all the way back into the early 2000s. So there is a lag sometimes, and as the mayor said, we look for grant funding. Sometimes we have complexities that make the the project go on longer than it should. And sometimes it's just bandwidth, like we put off South Avenue because We Play was such a demand on our recreation department's time last year.
Thank you.
Yep. So
And,
those are
and
the
we did the roof for $117,000,
Cool.
and it was bid out. So you're thinking the locker room, which we did in-house, for even
Yeah,
less
sorry.
than that.
You're right. Okay, and yeah, when it was in the capital plan, we used the dollar amounts that were in the capital plan unless we had a better estimate, because, you know, it might have been from a couple years ago. Okay, so the next section are the operating projects. So we put the capital ones up first, and so these are operating projects. So the dollar amounts are generally less. A lot of them are just made up because, you know, we really don't know, but we're basically saying these are not expensive, but they may be a significant time sink either for the administration or for the department that's involved in the work, right? So that first set are all negotiations, and so that has to be done with legal. Obviously, we've got you know, our collective bargaining agreements in there. We've got building sales to take care of. There's an easement with New York State Parks for the Mount Beacon tank. There's an agreement with the Fiora Trail on their maintenance facility. There's the, you know, application and agreement with Hudson River Housing right at the top. So those are all items you may have heard of. You know, they do take up time. I think the ADU one is getting close. The other ones are moving along, and others are put off, you know, until they have to get done. Chris, would you add anything on the agreements and the contracts?
I would say that the big investment of time on this are the two major contracts with our firefighter and police unions. The Royal Karting should be fairly straightforward. They're willing to roll over their 2019 price for another year. So we've asked, I confirmed that last week, and I'll be working with the attorneys to draft something on that to bring to you. And both firehouses we expect to be listed in early April. We're getting them ready.
All right. The next section is for, in particular, finance.
Paloma has a question.
Paloma has a question.
Thanks, Lee.
right ahead.
I wasn't sure what number 41 was, Main Street shared private parking lots.
Chris, you want to do that one, or?
Yeah, we've been exploring arrangements with private parking lot owners to see if we might be able to make an arrangement where that lot becomes a public parking lot in exchange for us plowing it and taking care of it. We had a conversation, for instance, with the owner of the former City Hall next door to Mays Hook and Ladder. That might be in the offing at some point, but right now he wasn't ready for it. Similarly, we've had preliminary conversations with M&T Bank, with the Islamic Teaching Center, a couple others, just to put feelers out, looking towards a shared parking system. A lot of these are only used for a small amount of time during the week, and again, if for instance, the property owner next to us by Mays decides that they want to do that, then we can actually reconfigure the parking lot so that you get the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts, because I can configure it in a way where we get more parking spaces.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, you can continue, Lee.
Okay. So the next section, just the admin one, just was isolating, as Chris said, the work on the new water meter system for finance and getting the billing right is a big investment of their time. So we just wanted to isolate it. It doesn't cost anything, but it's a lot of their time. Plus they have to do the hotel tax collection now as well. So we just wanted to isolate those. Those we both are trying to get those to come online, this year. All right. So
As I recall, we were asking the county if they could collect our hotel tax. Did they decline that offer or request?
I can field this, Lee, if you want. They didn't necessarily decline it. It was actually easier for us to get the package, the software package from Granicus. We already have a software system for identifying Airbnbs. They also have a collection nodule that you can buy.
Got it.
So we're going to be doing that, and that's what the county uses. So after multiple conversations, we figured out that would be the easiest way, and we hope to go live on that in April.
Thank you.
Right. So the next section is planning zoning. Obviously, we were talking about that this evening. We just tried to do a list of, where are we heading? What are we thinking about? Again, there's some flexibility in this, but I just did a cut at it, right? The council had asked for a speed limit reduction, being the 25 mile an hour citywide, except where the state controls the speed limit. And we heard that, and Chris arranged to get it funded by somebody else, or getting close to getting funded. We're not there yet, Chris?
We're close. I spoke to the Dutchess County Transportation Council, which is doing one of these for the city of Poughkeepsie under their United Planning Work Program. They're hoping to be able to do that this year for us. So they would actually conduct the study so that, because they have experience with it now that they've done Poughkeepsie's.
So that's a good example, because that was one where the council raised it several times, and we said, we can't do this instantly. Put it in the queue, try to get someone to fund it. A round or two later, meaning not the same year, we can put it on the table, get it done, right? We're not quite there yet, but that's what that one is.
And initially, the guidance from the state was confusing, and it wasn't clear what an engineering study was. So in the law, it said you could do this if you do an engineering study, and then the question follows, well, what do you need to do to meet that standard? So I think they figured it out now. The county has one of these under its belt, so we're ready to go hopefully this year.
Okay. The next one, I think you've all heard about. This is the Beekman Street Complete Streets, which Chris just successfully put in the $3.8 million application to the County Transportation Council. We're hoping to get, $3 million from them, and that we would pay the rest. It's in brackets because we don't know yet.
And we're not clear that any federal funding is going to be forthcoming. So again, I'll take it with a grain of salt whether or not this even comes through
Right.
at any level.
Then the other items under planning, zoning, and again, most of the work that in terms of department means planner and legal, right? That's how to think about the department column in this section. And, what we do for the Fjord Trail, what we do for the Beacon Hopewell Rail Trail, whether it's finishing the feasibility study, so the county has funded that. I don't think I have the dollar amount right for their feasibility study, but maybe I do. And then looking at the recommendations from the Fishkill Avenue Committee, doing the zoning for it, other zoning. So that's what that's about. And then figuring out what the DMV lot is up to, meaning the county's lot.
And the mayor and I met with County Executive Serino on Friday, and our top ask was the rail trail, because there is no solid plan. There's a feasibility study that's being undertaken, and we are starting a conversation before that's finalized this summer to say, we'd really like the county to take this on as you have on the other 3 rail trails in the county.
Was she receptive to that?
Yeah, she was very open. No commitments, because I think they're waiting to see the results of the feasibility study and how much that might cost and how it might be phased. And we, of course, pitched that we would be the first phase.
But I think there's a good logical argument for it. The positive news was when we met with the county exec, she brought her chief of staff, which comes everywhere, but also the head of the planning department.
Commissioner.
So Owen Rafter was there, and we were very pleased to have him because they recognize that our needs and interests are centered around planning that rail trail, their housing programs. But again, our number one, as Chris said, is rail trail. Okay.
As this came up in reference to this number 52, did you mention the DMV lot, or you really want to focus on the rail trail for this particular meeting?
We mentioned it, and we talked a bit about housing and our participation in the ADU program that we're doing with Hudson River Housing, and so she's aware that we're interested in it, and the mayor, Lee, why don't you, the mayor brought it up too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously we're interested in where they're going. They weren't prepared to, discuss it at the time, so that there's, something they're working on. But that's, they know it's important to us, and we also told them that we viewed that as could be a model for us to use publicly owned space along Main Street, parking lots for, the ability to do housing in a way that would create more affordable than the standard inclusionary zoning.
Am I completely making up that they put out an RFP? And
No,
get-
you're absolutely correct. It was a request for expressions of interest.
Thank you.
And they had several viable responses. I think where they got delayed is that my understanding is Dutchess County doesn't have a mechanism to do this other than a bid, like a straight bid that is only about the dollar value. Whereas Ulster County has a law that allows it to consider public interests such as housing. And I think Dutchess was exploring how they could match what we used to do in Ulster County.
All right. You bore with me through 50 items, so thank you. We're getting close to the back of the list, which means stuff that is less set in stone. And then this future projects is, Chris and I kind of worked our way through, so what's in the queue? And there's a number of things that people don't talk about that are in the queue and should be in the queue. So for instance, from our Main Street work on that committee, they talked about bathrooms. They talked about reconfiguring East Main and Main Street intersection, reconfiguring Churchill and Main Street. So we just started up a list of things we may want to be doing. If the, rail line is abandoned, we may want to do those intersections faster than the county is ready to help us fund it. So that's what this list is about here, starting in 101. I just decided to start a higher numbering system. There could be other items. There was an email from Amber reminding me that we had intended to put something about communications in this list. But this would be the area where, we'd like some input, or, these are the right items. Are there more? Are some of these higher priority than others? Because these are things that aren't set in stone yet. And we would need to plan, figure out how to fund, and start to queue up over time, right? Not happening in a day. But I'll stop there.
Could I throw out a couple at this point that I would suggest?
Yeah.
Well, one that we've talked about in the past and that we're going to do, I assume, but the comp plan, I'm not sure where that would be included, and if that's such a thing that should be included in this list.
You mean the update?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Because that does entail certain expenditures, I believe, and attention. I would like to, it may not be possible or feasible at this point, but I would like to at least have a conversation about a community center and what we would hope that could achieve, and what, like a feasibility study or so, determining what our needs are as a community, and if it takes a building to be built, or can we use existing structures and programs. But I think it would be wise to figure out what we need and what a community center could possibly serve, the purpose that it could serve in the community. So at minimum, I'd like to have a study and determine that we as a community are providing, a sense of community and support to both our volunteers, our seniors, and our youth. So it's a conversation is the best way to start.
Yeah, I appreciate it, George. Yeah, the item 120 was just writing down, hey, look, the rec center is the closest thing we have. Doing the renovation might, be the same thing. It might not. So I think, you're describing it as a broader question first is certainly fair, and we can have that discussion. But I would put it with 120. Obviously, if we want to do a separate structure somewhere else, then we may not want that building at all.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, I think it should start with establishing what our needs are as a
Yeah.
community and what's not being addressed at this point, and how we can address things better. So
Okay.
I would like to have that conversation, within this year if possible.
Yeah, and I'd second that. I completely agree. And George, the way you described it, that it's not, you talked about a study, but you talked about finding out what the community needs are. And conversations I've been having with council members and with the mayor is having those conversations. There's much that can be discovered, much that can be done short of doing a formal study. And how do we introduce that into our conversations? And so I think in not too distant future, we'll be talking about my interest in having a parking lot place on our agenda where we can prioritize and have some conversations, because I think short of a formal study, there's a lot of work that we can identify that needs to be done in very cost-effective ways to discover that information. And I'm particularly keen as well on community resources, third spaces. There's potential interest in developing a community center, but I think along the pathway to develop a community center, there's a lot of resources that do exist and could benefit from conversation with the community about identifying and how to draw attention to them and how to support them in other ways.
Okay. I will point out
Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Lee, if you.
I just want to point out on this topic that, I don't know, Chris, you've got the number handy, but I think the rec budget, since I've been mayor, has doubled. And so, part of our focus is programs as opposed to edifice. And we think that's a correct approach. That doesn't mean we might not do something involving structure at some point, but, I'd much rather have the programming, and we can get it sooner rather than later, which is what we've been doing.
I agree. I do believe ultimately, if we could afford it, if in a perfect world, everything under one roof creates a certain synergy with all the groups that operate under that common roof. So I think there's a benefit to, a center place, but I understand the reality may not allow that. So I think that at minimum, we should start the conversation. So, thank you.
I'll just add my 2 cents that I share your vision, George, of a shared space that can house that synergy. I know that we did do the recreation study a few years back, and I think there is a lot that can be built from that study. I think the first step is a broader conversation, as George is suggesting, looking holistically at our community needs alongside the specific data we have around recreational needs.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry, Joe, I'd expand the conversation and the thought process, expand our minds, if you will, to the overlap around the communications plan that we've discussed, and Councilperson Grant raised in her email, and we've discussed in previous meetings, that it's not just necessarily city resources, the rec center program, there's other programs, there's other organizations that could contribute to the broader mission that we're trying to achieve and would identify through this conversation.
Okay.
And the last thing I just wanted to throw out there, and I'm not sure what the state of it is, but I think that if at some point we could get an update or figure out what the future of the university settlement is on a larger scale, not just the pool or the grounds, but just if there is a future plan for it, and what place that might, what role that might place in in our whole rec program.
Yeah, Chris, do you want to comment on that? Because it is a contingent item that we have to kind of know the answer to that first. Chris, you want to add on that?
So we don't own the University Settlement Camp. We are using it under a 20-year agreement from New York State Parks that expires in 2028, and then it can be renewed for another 20 years. I have already seeded the idea with New York State Parks that we would like to buy the park for $1 from the state so that we can invest in things that have a useful life of more than 20 years. Right now, I only have an agreement till 2028, so it's really hard to go to bond council and say, well, we'd like to fix this roof, which has a 25-year probable useful life. If they were to sell it to us, it helps us be able to make the investments in it. So I think what we do there really depends on how they react to that. So we've approached them at the region about it. We haven't taken it much further because we have a number of years yet, and there's a lot of other stuff coming up. Also in rec, before we leave that, I do want to note that we have a number of projects pending from prior capital programs. So we have a full design and funding for the renovation of Riverfront Park, Pete and Toshi Seeger Riverfront Park, and that has just been waiting. We can do about one project a year. I know last year we got really bogged down with We Play, so we had to put off South Avenue Park. It's a huge stretch for us to get that done this year. We were hoping to look at maybe Riverfront Park next year in 2026, and that way we know the outcome of what might happen with the TOD as well. So some of the things we've held because we're not clear, like with the TOD, some of the ideas went over the railroad into the park, and we didn't want to rebuild a park and then have part of it, ripped up. And alternatively, we might have somebody else be able to pay for the improvements. So a lot of the things, we still have things queued up that never got done. Like if you look at Beekman Street, for instance, that study about a complete street was done in 2018. So again, I'm still working off things that the council in 2017, 2020, last year queued up.
Yeah, and Chris, I forgot the investments we've done in parks, and not only have we done the operating budget doubling of rec, but we've also done major capital improvements for all our parks. And those are the choices that you put them in the capital plan. We executed them. So we just need to be measured about how we go about it. And George, I heard you say exactly that it'll depend on. We need to look at it holistically. But if we have the ability to invest in university settlement because, the state isn't hanging on to it and we actually control it and own it, and we have West Center Street, and we have, a facility for meetings on Main Street, meaning the Memorial Building, those are strong assets to be used along with our parks. So that'll be part of the puzzle when we look at the whole picture, right?
And another piece with settlement camp is just what's the remaining useful life of the pool? And is there going to be money available from New York State? They've finally, after generations, opened up a funding source for building new pools, which are really expensive because they have to be ADA compliant. You have to be able to not walk in, but you have a gradient entryway, and they're very expensive. And if we were to rebuild a pool, I'm not sure I would put it at the settlement camp because it's really hard to walk to.
Yeah,
unless you're on that
and I
side
guess
of
that's-
town.
I mean, relative to what we're talking about, but in general, I think one of the value of this list that Lee has put together, it's not only an action plan, but it's an aspiration plan.
Yeah.
And I think it's also good for the community to see that we're thinking about these things. We may not have the funds or the ability right now, but we're not thinking about it.
Right.
So I think there's value to just seeing it, and even having conversations, because a lot of people ask, they go to university camp, and they see these fallen buildings down, and it seems like an opportunity wasted, and people wonder what's happening there. So
Yeah,
it's good every once in a while just to put a reality check on it.
Maybe when we have Mark in for the capital program in May, we can talk a little bit more about the buildings. The short answer is we asked to take numerous buildings down there, the smaller cabins up on the hill, because they don't have proper footings. There's no structural integrity to them. Some of them have trees in the roof, and it was quite onerous process to go through. It took state parks a year just to tell us what the onerous process would be. And that's when we said, well, maybe we'll try this a different way. So we haven't been able to take any of them down yet. We have been doing basic maintenance, and we do have a caretaker there, Andrew Stevens from our water department, and he's been an amazing resource up there, getting it tidied up.
Looks better than it ever has.
Yeah, and that's Andrew. So, and Mark Price. But we can have that conversation. We're lining up the next capital program to bring to you at the first meeting in May. And when Mark is here, let's talk more about it. I may have more information from what the state's perspective is on it.
Thank you.
The other thing, we had Hidden Brook on here, and I know people have asked because there are rumors that Hidden Brook is for sale. We're clearly interested in the outcome of that property. We've had one preliminary conversation with the church. They're not sure what they're doing yet, but we know that if the opportunity comes up to conserve that land, that will be on this list as well.
Chris, are there any other, you mentioned Pete and Toshi Seeger park renovations, are there any other projects like that we've talked about in the past that aren't yet on this list that we should just be aware of?
Yeah, there's a walkway around Memorial Park that we put in a previous capital program for $525,000. That would basically build out the walkway that we have on Wilkes and have it circumnavigate the park, so you had a nice area that you could jog or use a stroller or teach a kid to ride a bike. We're doing the skate park improvements. That wasn't in a capital program, came out of participatory budgeting, but we're going to do that this year. We also have improvements just that never made it onto capital programs, like we're doing the softball fields this year because the students raised that. We know the basketball courts over at Memorial Park need attention. So as we can, we'll be trying to do smaller projects as well to improve the physical facilities.
You mentioned pickleball at one time at Memorial.
Yeah, so, there was an area that once, at one point was identified for a batting cage. It never came to fruition. We think that the use of a pickleball court would be more frequent and appreciated maybe than a batting cage, which is very seasonal. So we're looking at that for the old tennis court that's behind the skate park.
Just to clarify, clarify about the ball field. It is listed as number 14 to address the fencing.
Yeah,
The other
great.
issue that they raised was the flooding, which I understand was more complicated. Has there been any fact-finding about what we could do about that?
No.
Not yet.
We'll look at it. I mean, they know there are areas that need to be leveled out over there. And as we're doing the fencing, I've asked them to take a look at it.
Yeah, I'm guessing that Memorial Park is always going to have some water issues. It's a function of where it's located. But let's find out.
And it's hard to figure out where to run that water, too. There's no pitch or...
Yeah, the one I also want to add is you look at item 111. Dennings Point has had a change, and I think you are all aware of this, that Clarkson University has pulled out of the Rivers and Estuaries buildings there, and they've now gone to the State Park. Chris, correct me if I got that wrong. And that State Parks is now starting to think about what do they want to do with the building. So here's this very cool building that's been built that we have some say in. I don't know yet.
Yeah, we've been invited to meet with State Parks, Scenic Hudson, Clarkson, and other partners, and they're arranging that. The building is not in very good condition, though.
But you said it's owned by State Park?
It's owned by State Parks, but it had been used by Clarkson, and apparently major systems in the building are in dire need of replacement.
It's not an old building.
No, it just,
Renovation long ago.
yeah. I heard it's not in good shape.
Just while we're on the topic of parks, I know there's been some very preliminary conversations about a Fishkill Riverfront Park below, I'm going to mess up the address, but you know the location I'm talking about.
I do. Yeah, so there are a couple properties along the Fishkill Creek that that are vacant that would make good park space. We actually had Lee and I had a conversation with Sergey from the CAC last week about that. And again, if there's a willing seller, that could be on the list. We floated some years ago to the owner of 2 parcels that are right along the creek that would make a nice little pocket park, that we would be interested in having a conversation about that if they ever got to the point where they might want to sell. Or donate. We love donations.
Yeah, but I think that one's even longer term, right? Because there's a lot of things we don't control there. But it's appropriate to sit on the list, right? Because this section is aspirational, as George said. It doesn't have to be things we absolutely can always get to. Some of the ones we will definitely get to, the Tyranda Bridge, the Bridge Street Bridge, we will get to them, but they've been on hold for a while because we've got, a lot of other things, and it can wait a little while.
No, but I mean, I'm just repeating what others have said, but I think having this list here that the public can view and we can view, even though we know it might be a decade off for some of these projects, I think is helpful, as George said, so people know that we're even thinking about it.
I think we were actually thinking in terms of a 5-year timeline. I mean, there are things that aren't on here that are also in our thoughts. So again, this wasn't completely comprehensive, so.
Yeah.
I mean, should we put a parameter of 5 years as opposed to 50 years? That'd be helpful.
So I would just point to the example of the Central Fire Station. I would have been in this back section for about 20 years, right? And then suddenly it moved forward, right? And so, it's hard because it's not easily made concrete. This is a back of the envelope list in some ways, and some of them will move forward and develop. Some of them may be easy. I think Bridge Street Bridge may not be a difficult one. Don't know yet, but we have to get, eventually turn some focus to it and see what's entailed to know how big is it? Is it bigger than a bread box or not? We don't even know some of those questions. So it's very preliminary, but I think it's still useful. And I think this is where the council's kind of policy and prioritization, I think, makes a difference.
Yeah, Lee, I kind of was interested in shifting us to that conversation. It does feel like there are things on this list that, the Route 52 access road, yes, and also that depends on other things, so it's hard to say right now that we should prioritize that, whereas things like the bridges, even the sidewalk and bicycle master plans, communication plans, there are things that we might be able to at least put some more meat on the bone this year, as opposed to things that they might be priorities, but there's just enough unknown that it doesn't make sense to prioritize this year. So I was curious, Lee, if you already have a point of view and how we can go through both the things that you've already added to this list, which was already very comprehensive with things we brought up today, to try to tease out those items that we do want to spend money and or council time on to kind of to flesh out a bit more.
Yeah, I think, Molly, you mentioned one area. Again, Chris, I'm interested in your opinion. He and I haven't compared notes and know exactly what, each is going to say. But I think we should be able to kind of think about teeing up a study, periodically, right? One a year or something like that. And council asked for, the traffic one on a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. Took us a year. We teed it up. Let's go do it. If we want to tee up another one, pick the one, that we want to tee up, and then we can get started, because you have to define what it is, define whether you need a consultant, what kind you need, scope the approximate price, those sorts of things. So maybe there is think about, one study a year or something like that, separate from the capital projects.
I think where I start to have a little bit of a hard time, one, is that my understanding of what we want out of a sidewalk plan / bike plan / mobility plan is actually a comprehensive view of those different streams and modes of transportation. And so I would put that comprehensive view at the top of the list, but I recognize that makes the study and the need larger and maybe extends the timeline of when it becomes feasible to do.
Well, I think the trade-off too, and Molly and I and Lee and I have had separate conversations about this, is when you do a study, it's really good to understand what are you looking for specifically, what are the outcomes you want, and make it specific. If we did a sidewalk study, what the outcome would be. It would be a prioritization of where you spend your sidewalk dollars. The mobility plan, if you just hand an ill-defined mobility plan to a consultant, it's great for the consultant because they just bill and bill and bill, and they put all this stuff together that probably already exists. For instance, like we just did a study of the bus service in the county, so you have all that stuff. We have done analyses in the past of sidewalks. They would compile all that, and they would, unless you define them really well, you'll end up spending a lot of money for a study that really doesn't provide for implementation. The studies, I can't tell you how many studies we have on our shelves, and formerly I had at Ulster County when I was Deputy Director of Planning that never got implemented. And so what I would suggest is you break it down into the pieces, and you could have them form a larger study, but then exactly. Again, you work with a consultant, you see if you're getting a good product from them. If you are, and they have the expertise to go on from, a sidewalk to a bike. Other things in the studies are like accessibility for persons with disabilities. We should be looking at that as well. So again, you want to define these pretty well. Like a communication study, I think you need to define your goals and what outcomes you're looking for. And then we can figure out, is this something we can do in-house? Is this something we have a consultant for? How big a project is it?
Yeah. I mean, the outcome from these studies would be, how do we prioritize and how do we queue up in priority order the specific projects? Like which sidewalks where, which bike lanes where? Do we need that bike lane before we need the sidewalk over here?
To me, the sidewalk one would be a valuable one, because we're having this conversation every year about what sidewalks we should do with CDBG. They ask, what's the public process that you had? We do a hearing, and I would like somebody to take a look at it to see where there are gaps that could be readily filled that would then complete the sidewalk system. I look at Churchill Street and I think, wow, that really should have a sidewalk, and we should be taking those tracks out and redoing the geometry of that road so it's safe. And that's, again, that's a conversation with Metro North. We don't control those tracks, so.
That's one of the ones that the Main Street Access Committee came up with.
Absolutely, both of the intersections there, but again, like sidewalks, the turnaround on some of these grants is just so short. I would love to have a plan where we know the next 10 sidewalk projects. We have a GIS system that rates different segments of sidewalk on their condition, on their ADA compatibility, on whether or not there's missing pieces that we could just fix. So.
Can I ask a clarifying question? In terms of one study a year, is that one study for all of these projects, or are some of them different enough that we could, if funding allowed, do more than one study? I'm sort of unclear on if the one study is just one of these things.
It really depends. It depends if you're doing it, in-house or consultant. I mean, a lot of these Natalie could work on. Like, I'm sure Natalie could put together the sidewalk study.
But right now
the reality is the Fishkill Avenue Corridor Committee was supposed to take 6 or 12 months, and we're now in year 2 of it with no end in sight. So her time and the money to pay her, we've really gone over budget. Mm-hmm. So again, part of this is we can get to where we want over time, but you can't do it all at once. You have to kind of space it out so that we don't break the bank. We are the bank. So.
No.
Let's not break ourselves.
Taxpayers are
Don't
the
break
bank.
us, yes.
To that specific example, Chris, where one of these projects could be taken on by Natalie, but we've exceeded her budget as it exists in one part of the budget, could we be using part of that $75,000 that we hypothetically set aside for her to take on an additional project, or is it about her time capacity, like how many hours she has in a day?
I think the answer to that is you could, and it just depends on what her availability is. Because she's also staffing our planning board, which has, again, Jennifer might be able to talk about how busy they are, but it kind of fluctuates, as I understand, and some months all her hours are on that. Similarly with legal, like, when a lot of these things involve our city attorneys, and they're also off this sheet working on lawsuits that we're dealing with insurance and other things that are mundane, like contracts, and we only have them so many hours. We only have so much availability. So what we try to do is figure out how much we want to fit in, as much as we can, and we really have. As we get done with some of these legacy projects, multiple parts of our organization will be freed up. Like, we'll be really relieved when Fishkill Teller Avenue is done at the end of this year. And that's taken a lot from our attorney, our city engineer, finance, my time, water, actually, because they have to locate a lot of the utilities.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I did want to clarify around, I think this is covered under item 51, other housing zoning. Is this where our conversation about inclusionary zoning and the potential for multifamily zoning, and that whole conversation we had 2 weeks ago lives?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Just want to make sure it was here somewhere.
Yep. And see, I think, we can get to, I think this year we might be able to do some of the things on that housing list. I mean, Natalie put out a memo last summer. I had one a couple years back, had pretty much similar things. I think we can tackle some of those. Some of it's our own, discipline of let's get to it and let's not wait for, every piece of evidence to appear so that we can decide. We just use our judgment and make decisions based on people we trust, telling us what the answers are, right? So, yeah.
All right. Any other comments?
I'm just kind of curious what next steps are from here to come up with the ones that we might want to prioritize. Like, to give an example for a project that kicks off either this year, a planning study that kicks off either this year or next year.
Can I suggest that you dig down into your mobility and communication plans and try to figure out what are your goals, what do you want to look at, what are the outputs you're looking for, and then we can start to figure out how we resource that.
Yeah, I think that it would be great to continue that conversation here and agree that we need to clarify that before we ask for any hard things to be done. I know Amber alluded to having some ideas about communications strategy in particular.
Good.
And I would suggest simply that we have this on the agenda in 2 weeks again to keep the conversation going, particularly around those two topics.
I was going to ask, so you're saying those two topics or broader, the whole list of priorities? You're saying those two topics in particular?
That seems like where we're headed for in terms of next steps, but I'm open, to other.
No, I think it's great. And my point was going to be that this conversation, I really appreciate this, and let me express my gratitude that we're having this conversation around priorities, but I think having a heads up about what's coming down the pike for conversations is really important so that we can prepare, do some background homework, and just have more pointed, effective, efficient conversations. So I'm really keen for that.
Jeff, you raised that with me, and, council, we sort of an informal process, but occasionally we've talked about just having a list of what are we trying to work on in the next few workshops. And I think that's a fair approach. It's been informal, it comes and goes. We can try it again, or we can talk at the end of each meeting, or what are we trying to get to next? What are we trying to get to? That's been on the table a while, right?
Yet I'm still keen on exploring, maybe formalizing it a bit more, within the confines of what exists. So I'll continue to explore that in conversation.
All right, and we may propose something too to make it easier.
Could we informally, just to start piloting that direction, hear from you, Lee, what you expect to be queuing up onto the agenda over the next, let's say, 2 workshops?
Some of that, yes, some of that, no. And as you know, a lot of it is, depends on what comes up, a hiring, a contract, or whatever. But in terms of a longer list, like what are we working on this year? Obviously, zoning's on our list, right? The Fishkill Avenue recs that we said we do the preliminary, and then if they come along further, we'll do more. Let's, we can do a preliminary.
We have a couple items that Bruce Flower put together before he left. He had a rezoning of 1 East Main that we're going to be bringing next workshop, because it doesn't make sense that it's light industrial. It's like you literally can't have tracks there. You're not supposed to anyway. And also, we were looking at what fees the council might consider waiving for ADUs. If we get the ADU program, we had a conversation previously that we didn't want those monies to be wasted on a bureaucratic process, and that maybe we could make that easier. So again, I had Bruce put together memos on both topics that we'll be bringing at the next workshop.
Okay, that'd be good.
And we will hopefully be bringing a building inspector to you at some point. First in executive session to meet, and then we'll bring him the person publicly.
Great.
And I think I had a question too, what Palma brought up about our larger affordable housing discussion. It sounds like that was actually already part of it that was mentioned there, the part about ADUs, so we might be able to move forward on that. And Lee, I think you said that because Natalie's time and our legal time is currently going towards the immediate Fishkill zoning think changes we want to make, that we'll kind of wait to finish that discussion up. At least they have capacity to then move back to affordable housing, kind of the last time that list of kind of requests and questions that the council had for them, we met 2 weeks ago. Am I understanding those next steps loosely correctly?
Yeah, we do need to space it out a little, right? It doesn't mean we can't accelerate a little as well, but, Natalie's not a full-time planner. She has other things that she works on, and we have budgets, as Chris said. So yeah, a little bit like that.
Does it need?
Great, thank you.
All right. Any other comments, Lee?
No, this was great. I appreciate everybody's, kind of listening through it and the ideas. And again, as you know, it's a little uncertain. We're trying to figure out how to get to this, but I think this is an improvement, so we can keep doing something like it. We can put something short-term on the, workshop kind of short-term agenda, as well as this longer-term one.
And I would just say there's other things that are moving along that aren't on this that we're getting grants for. I would just throw out quickly EV charging stations, making our fleet greener. We're in the process right now of buying 2 more electric vehicles. We're ramping up our tree program for the spring. Last year we got 38 trees planted by homeowners by doing a wholesale purchase that saved a lot of money in delivering it. So understand this isn't comprehensive. If you have smaller things you want to talk to me about, don't hesitate, because as I can fit them in, I will try. But again, sometimes I have to say, well, I can't get to it this year, but we'll think about it.
Okay.
All right. So, next meeting is next Tuesday, February 18th at 7 o'clock. That'll be a city council meeting where there will be public comment. And
the mayor will be doing his State of the City address.
okay.
You think I'm going to be done?
Well, I just put it out there, Lee, so you better finish it now.
Right,
Yes,
it's in the
sir.
public space now, Lee.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
On the flight home.
All right.
And we don't have
Good.
to adjourn this meeting, so, right?
You
We
need a
do?
motion to adjourn, I
Okay.
think.
How about a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you.
Good, Lee? Thank
Thank you,
you.
Mayor.
All right, that was good.